Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Islamic Economics series. So, have you ever really stopped to think about the foundations, the philosophy that modern economics is built on? I mean, we all hear it's a hard science, right? Like physics. But what if that whole claim is built on some pretty shaky ground?
Now, before we can even begin to talk about building a truly Islamic approach to economics, we've got to understand the system that's already in place. So in this explainer, that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to pull back the curtain and really dig into the core philosophy that drives modern mainstream economics. You got to check the foundations before you start building a new house, right?
So, here's our roadmap. First up, we'll look at how economics makes its big claim to be a science. Then, we'll see what some major philosophers of science have to say about that. We'll dive into the whole realism debate. And of course, we have to talk about the famous rational man model. From there, we'll expose the values and ideology hiding in plain sight. And finally, we'll explore a totally different way to look at economics, as a conversation.
Okay, let's dive right in with Section 1, the scientific claim of economics. This is really the orthodox view, the idea of economics as a positive science. And this is the big one, right? The central promise of modern economics is that it's not just a bunch of opinions. It's a hard, objective science.
This whole idea is built on something called positive science. The goal here, the dream, really, is to be just like a physicist or a chemist, to discover these universal, unshakable laws that govern how the economy works. The key thing to remember is that it's all about describing the world as it is, not getting into the messy business of how it should be.
But here's the thing. That scientific claim runs into trouble almost immediately. I mean, think about a real physical law, like Boyle's law for gases. It works the same way every single time, no exceptions. But economic laws? Well, they're a lot more fragile. Take the famous law of demand. For one, the relationship is asymmetrical. Sure, high demand can push prices up, but high prices don't automatically create high demand. And it's definitely not universal. All it takes is a new trend, a shift in what's cool, and poof, the so-called law just falls apart.
And that fragility brings us right to our next section, challenges from the philosophy of science. It forces us to ask this really critical question. If its laws are so breakable, can economics truly meet these idealized standards of science? Can we really put it in the same category as physics?
The great philosopher of science Karl Popper, he had a name for this. He called it the problem of demarcation. Basically, how do you draw a clear line in the sand between what is actually science and what just isn't? And for Popper, the answer wasn't about how complicated your theory was. No, it was all about the mindset, the critical attitude of the scientist.
See, Popper's big idea, and this is really a game changer, was that science doesn't move forward by proving theories right. It moves forward by proving them wrong. A real scientist, in his view, doesn't try to protect their favorite theory. They do the opposite. They attack it. They make these really bold, specific predictions, and then they try with all their might to find evidence that breaks them. And if the theory fails the test, you toss it out. You start over. That's how science grows.
But then you have Thomas Kuhn, who came along and said, hold on a second. He argued that, well, most of the time, scientists aren't actually trying to tear down their theories at all. Instead, they're working pretty comfortably inside a dominant framework he called a paradigm. During these long periods of normal science, they're basically just solving puzzles using the rules everyone already agrees on. They don't question the fundamental rules, not until the anomalies, the problems that don't fit, start piling up so high that the whole paradigm collapses. And that's when you get a scientific revolution.
So this whole debate between Popper's falsification and Kuhn's paradigms, it perfectly sets the stage for our next section, the realism debate. And this leads us to one of the most influential and frankly controversial arguments in all of modern economics.
Okay, so think about this. What do you do if you're an economist? And you just know that your core assumptions are kind of ridiculous. Things like assuming everyone has perfect information or acts with perfect rationality all the time. Well, Milton Friedman came up with a pretty radical answer. He basically said, it doesn't matter. The assumptions can be completely unrealistic, totally false. The only thing that matters is whether your theory makes good predictions.
And he used this famous analogy of leaves on a tree to make his point. He said, look, we can build a mathematical model that perfectly predicts the density of leaves on a tree by assuming the leaves are consciously trying to maximize their sunlight exposure, like they're solving complex equations. Now, we all know that's absurd, right? Leaves don't have brains. But Friedman's point was, if the model works, if it gives you the right answer, who cares how crazy the assumptions are? The theory is useful.
But this whole approach, known as instrumentalism, where a theory is just a tool for prediction,
It has a really powerful counterargument. It is put forward by the philosopher Daniel Hausman, who basically asked, why wouldn't you look under the hood? Think about it. If you can literally observe that your assumptions are false, isn't that a failed prediction right there? By saying, oh, don't worry about the assumptions, you're effectively shielding your theory from one of the most important tests it could face.
And that brings us right to the engine that's actually under the hood of mainstream economics. Let's talk about the critiques of the rational man, this challenge to the famous Homo economicus model. This is the idea of the human being as a perfectly rational, perfectly self-interested calculating machine. And let me tell you, this simple little model has been hit with critiques from just about every direction. You've got the Austrian school who argue that it completely ignores real-world uncertainty and the subjective choices people make. Then there's experimental economics, which has shown something fascinating in lab settings. Markets can be super efficient even when the people in them are poorly informed and don't act rationally at all. It's almost like the market system is smart even if the individuals aren't. And of course, feminist economics raises a massive question. Is a model built entirely on masculine-coded values like pure autonomy and self-interest really a universal model for all human beings?
And you see, once you start pulling at that thread, once you question the core model of the human being, it's a very short leap to questioning the entire discipline's claim of objectivity. This brings us to values, ideology, and objectivity. Can economics really be value neutral? Is that even possible?
Well, the famous sociologist Max Weber argued, pretty convincingly, that it's impossible. Just think about it for a second. Out of the infinite number of things an economist could study in the world, why do they choose to focus on something like GDP growth, instead of, say, the level of community happiness? Weber's point is profound. Our own values, our own ideas about what matters, are what guide our selection of what's even worth studying in the first place. Now, the economist Lionel Robbins tried to solve this by drawing a very sharp line. He argued that, look, ethics is about choosing our ends, what kind of society we want to live in. Economics, he said, is completely separate. It's only about the means. So economics can't tell you what goal to pick, but it can tell you the most efficient way to get there and what the trade-offs are going to be.
But the feminist critique really blows that clean distinction out of the water. It makes this whole discussion incredibly concrete by showing how a specific set of cultural values often associated with masculinity, are just baked right into the discipline. It shapes everything. The models prioritize competition over cooperation, autonomy over connection, and it even shapes the topics that are considered important. Just think about it. Why is the choice of what college to attend treated as a central topic in human capital, while the incredibly important work of early childhood development that happens inside a family is often pushed to the margins? These aren't neutral choices.
Okay, so where does all this leave us? If modern economics isn't this purely objective, value-free machine that it claims to be, then what is it? This leads us to our final section, economics as a conversation. We need to explore some alternative visions for what this discipline could be.
And here, the economist Deirdre McCloskey gives us a really powerful, kind of radical new way to look at things. She argues that we need to stop thinking about economics as a kind of machine-like science and start seeing it for what it is: rhetoric, a grand conversation. She says economists aren't just discovering objective truths, they're actively trying to persuade each other. And they use a whole toolkit to do it, not just logic and data, but also metaphors and compelling stories.
And this is such a crucial shift in perspective. The old metaphor, the one that still dominates, is the economy as a machine. It's something that can be tweaked, controlled, and optimized to reach some predictable, stable state. But this new metaphor sees the economy as something completely different. It's a conversation. It's a creative process. It's open-ended. It's always evolving. And it's fundamentally unpredictable because it's made up of real, choosing human beings.
And this really brings us full circle, doesn't it? If economics isn't just some neutral tool we pick up, but is actually a framework that we build, a framework that's inevitably shaped by our values and our metaphors, well, then that means we have a choice, a really important choice. The key question is no longer, what are the universal laws of economics? The real question is, what kind of economics do we want to build? And answering that question, that is the essential starting point for creating a truly meaningful, value-driven Islamic economic framework.
We'll be digging deeper into that very question in our future explainers. See you in the next one. Subscribe, like, and comment.